It's Tuesday, July 1st, 2025, and we have a slight risk of severe weather out here in the mid-Atlantic associated with a large marginal risk which spans all the way down from the northeast into the southeast. We have two isolated marginal risk of severe weather, one out here in the central plains, so Nebraska and South Dakota, and another more rare one that we don't normally see too often, back here over parts of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, so up in the upper central plains. Tomorrow's risk is going to be almost entirely a wind risk with a 15% risk of severe winds out here in the mid-Atlantic, then a associated kind of conditional 5% risk of severe winds, which spans from our northeast to southeast risk area. Then our two risk areas, both out here in the central plains. In the lower central plains, we have a 5% risk of severe winds, and the same goes for out here in the upper central plains as well. Then we have one isolated hail threat out here in our central plains risk area with a 5% risk of hail. And the Storm Prediction Center has not outlined a clear tornado risk, and I would also agree that there's not really going to be a risk of tornadoes today. And then, like always, there is expected to be widespread thunderstorms across the United States. And tomorrow's risk actually looks pretty boring. We have a small marginal risk of severe weather up here in the northern upper plains, and then widespread thunderstorms across the United States. So definitely the weather is about to change quite a bit. Here is the simulated reflectivity from our northeast, mid-Atlantic, and southeast risk area. And right here up in the mid-Atlantic near DC is going to be our main area of interest. As we push further into the day, at around lunchtime, we see some storm activity starting to get organized. And what we'll actually see in a couple of hours away from this, so in the early to mid-afternoon, we'll see just an explosion along our cold front. So a lot of frontal activity out here in this region, which is going to kind of be fueling that risk. And then there will also be a low pressure system down in parts of central Tennessee, which could fuel storms out here in this region a tad bit more than storms in other parts of our line. But our main risk is going to be up here because it's going to have the most favorable ingredients to work with. So in the early afternoon is when this storm complex up here in the mid-Atlantic is expected to peak in intensity and be the most organized, bringing that threat for mostly severe winds. And if there were to be a tornado, it would probably be here today, but that risk is so slim, and it would probably just be a spin-up weak tornado if there were to be one. And of course, at mid-afternoon, we're going to have all of these other thunderstorms, possibly severe, along our cold front, stretching all the way down into the southeast from the northeast, with a possibly increased area of severe potential up here near this low, which will have moved from Tennessee up into parts of Kentucky, bringing that threat along with it. And then these storms are really going to start to lose their steam right after sunset in the evening hours. And our severe risk will probably be over by the early night hours as well. And here is a simulated reflectivity from our Central Plains risk area, where there is the potential of a line of severe storms to develop out here, pushing eastward into Nebraska in the late afternoon to evening hours, where it could bring the threat of severe damaging winds and possibly some small hail. And this is going to be initiated by our upper plains convergence zone, as well as a little nudge up here from our 500 millibar winds. So that will help with some large scale forcing. And it looks like this storm will chug along for a bit before it sort of collapses in the early night hours. And then we'll actually get an area of organized storms up here in parts of South Dakota in the early morning hours on Wednesday, which look like they could pose that threat for severe winds and hail as well. And this could also be partially initiated by an outflow boundary from the storm, but mostly some upper level forcing from a trough. And our last risk area, which is going to be up here in the upper central plains, which I think is the most conditional risk, is the risk for a couple of supercells out here in parts of Idaho around midday, where these will also be helped out by a nudge from our upper air or large scale forcing, and then possibly an area of increased moisture around a high pressure system. And then of course there will also be other favorable ingredients like increased bulk shear and a modestly juiced up air mass. But simulated reflectivity is not painting the picture of a super organized storm mode, so this is definitely something to watch. Here are 500 millibar winds, which give us a better idea on where that large scale forcing is going to be. We can see that most of it is going to be out here in our mid-Atlantic region, as well as an area of increased bulk shear from that troughing. And then we also see a little dip in our jet stream down across our cold front, which will also help to initiate storms in parts of Tennessee and Kentucky. And as we move further into the day, where we're going to be looking for a storm initiator out here in our Central Plains risk areas, we will see a bit of a nudge back here in Idaho in our upper Central Plains risk area. and then down here in Nebraska as well, which will help to initiate those storms and possibly increase some bulk shear and help to organize them as well. Here is a forecast sounding from our mid-Atlantic risk area, and our hodograph doesn't look super indicative of any certain type of severe weather. Our surface helicity is going to be low, our low level shear is going to be low, but our bulk shear or updraft sustaining and strengthening shear is going to be near that 40 knot threshold, so definitely enough to help those storms organize. Today, we don't really see a very favorable vertical wind profile, as we can see all of our vectors are pointed in pretty much the same direction, which could hurt storm organization a tad. Our lowest cloud level would be low enough for a tornado to be possible, even though that threat is basically zero, and that will also help to minimize that wind threat from becoming super duper strong. This is also another reason why our hail is going to be pretty much non-existent tomorrow, even though we do have a tad bit of cape near our freezing layer. Our freezing layer is going to be quite high, and our lapse rates are going to be super low, so definitely not a hail setup at all tomorrow. However, we do see a very moist environment, which will help these storms to sustain and produce that hazard of severe winds for a long time. And then we also have a juiced up monosphere, a modestly juiced up atmosphere at around 2,500 joules per kilogram of cape, and a very high precipitable water air mass at 2.39 inches. So that will also help to support that threat for severe winds as well. Then our 3 cape is going to be nearing 150 at 142, which will also help to increase that threat of severe winds. So in summary, I don't really think there's going to be any hail out in the mid-Atlantic. I do think they will see widespread severe gusts, and I do think that if there were to be a tornado anywhere today, it would be here, although that risk is extremely slim, and they likely will not see one at all. Here is a weather sounding from our Central Plains risk area or Nebraska, and it really doesn't look like our hodograph is going to be super indicative of any severe weather, but we do see a tad bit of curving, which could possibly help with some storm organization. Then we see a bit of an elongation in our hodograph. We do see some veering in our winds, although the winds are going to be very light, which could help with storm organization. Our low level helicity is going to be very low. Our low level shear is going to be very low, but our bulk shear is going to be nearing 30 knots, which is still going to be pretty low, but it might be enough for those storms to sort of organize. Our lowest cloud level is going to be quite high, which would indicate a threat for severe winds. Our mid-level lapse rates are going to be pretty solid at 8.4 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer, with a bit of cape up here near our freezing level, which will help to support that risk of hail. Our dew points, which would be normally low in other regions, are going to be definitely enough for this region. We're at higher altitudes. You don't really need as high of a dew point to get the same effect as, per se, a 70 dew point at basically sea level. So definitely enough moisture for these storms to sustain and produce that threat of severe winds. We do have some dry air aloft, which would also support that threat for severe winds. And then we have around 2,000 cape, which would be enough for those storms to develop and become strong. Our precipitable water isn't going to be super high, but our downdraft cape is going to be pretty high at 1,600, which would help to support that threat for severe winds. And our relative humidity is going to be pretty low, which can help with that evaporative cooling and can also help with that threat of severe winds. So out here in our Nebraska or Central Plains risk area, I definitely see the threat of severe winds probably being realized. And then there is also a conditional threat for some small hail.